So my name is Jenny. If you're interested in my work, you can follow me at Qdork. That's my Twitter. And my website is qdork.com. Whoops. You might be wondering, oh, what did I make for... for Fantastic Arcade this year. And I made one of the cabinet games. And this is Pipsqueak. In case you don't know what Pipsqueak is about, I'm just going to play a video of it and tell you a bit. Also, I'm putting on background music because I don't know how to do sound, so that's why. But basically, you play as this silly-looking dog, and the way you control it is you hit left key or right key to move his feet around. And you're navigating yourself through these weird levels and encountering these bad guys while trying to collect these eggs. So yeah, I'll just... And yeah, so you can alternate left and right to walk straight, and you can turn by hitting the same key over and over again. And it's all about figuring out like how to traverse through this space. One other thing to note is even though everything looks super wobbly and physics-based, all the movement is turn-based. So the enemies only move when you move. So that's a little bit of it. And later on, as you go through the game, you'll encounter different objects. Like this is a pan that you can use to slam enemies. And I'll go into that a bit more later. But yeah, that's the game. Anyway, I'm going to show you a little bit of the stuff I've done in the past. So you might have known me from this game called Stellar Smooch. It's for free on iOS, so you should definitely go download it and play it if you have an iPhone or an iPad. And basically the whole point of the game is to make these guys hit each other and get them to smooch so all the other planets are happy. And I worked on this with AP Thompson, who is Bad Tetris on Twitter. We also collaborated on another game called BEGLITCHED. BEGLITCHED is a game about hacking and computers, and it takes match 3s and does like really cool stuff with it. So here are just some screenshots of it. That's for Steam and iOS, so if you want to check that out, please do. And AP doesn't like getting pictures taken, so this is a picture of Chewy, AP's cat. Yeah. Anyway, I also have done some solo work on my own. So last year, I showcased this collection of vignettes and mini games called Daily Motions. And it's just basically a bunch of these prototypes that I made, some of them for school, some of them on my own time. And they capture parts of things that I do every day, like doing makeup or doing yoga or Skyping with like a long-distance boyfriend. So like more specifically, if anyone knows this game, you've got to do your makeup in 10 seconds or less. And I'm not playing it right now, but basically this is how I figured out how to make it. I was doodling in Photoshop and was like, oh, it'd be funny if, I turned stuff like this into a game. So, and then you get scored. So this is probably like a 60%. I also made this other game for Ludum Dare a couple years ago called Wobble Yuga. You're supposed to contort this weird noodle-limbed avatar through a series of these poses, and you want to match them up. And once you do, you complete the pose, and you go through a series of those. So I just want to give you like a style of the types of games that I've made and have been known for. So yeah, and this is like the Skype game where you have like a conversation and the player is Skyping with me. And I respond, so sometimes I'm like really happy, but sometimes I'm like pretty, upset. I don't know. Yeah, and all of these prototypes were attempts to work on this larger game for this capstone project that I started called Consume Me. Here is this screenshot of like, I guess it's a mini game of like organizing pieces of Tetris-shaped food onto a plate. Because if you're not aware of the game, it's a game about my personal experience of dieting. So I thought, oh, it might be cool to, experiment with like metaphors, because games can do that, and I thought that was like a cool concept to explore. Yeah, so I just wanted to show you a little bit of like the work I did prior to making Pipsqueak. So you might be asking, or maybe you aren't asking, but something that I think people might wonder is like, why is Pipsqueak so different from all my other personal work? Pipsqueak is not me, and it's relying a lot more on like level design and stuff found in traditional games. And I'm gonna, attempt to explain why I chose to do that and how I ended up there through this process of like experimenting with different things. So basically, these shots were from this other talk I gave, but I ended up with like a bunch of these prototypes, like the ones I showed to you in Daily Motions, and I kept on, I don't know, I made them really quickly, but I don't know, I threw them out just as quickly as I made them. I was like very stubborn, thinking like, oh, I need this core mechanic to, have like a bigger game, and I tried going against that by, creating like frameworks. I also like just experimented with like a lot of different just a lot of different things, and it was like just this pretty depressing and stressful process of being like, oh, here's like a cool little gimmicky thing I could try, and then just like realize, oh, I can't really do much with it after like 5 seconds, or not 5 seconds, like 5 minutes. I felt like I didn't want anything to overstay its welcome, and taking something that was like this gimmick and making it into like a bigger thing felt like the wrong thing to do, and I just didn't know what to do about that. So I just felt like really sad about it. And this was basically stuff I was working on after I graduated. I was like focused on working on Consume Me and like thinking through this design issue and trying to figure out, oh, what can I do with it? And during that time, I prototyped this small game, and it's like one of the prototypes. So basically, you're me, and you want to clean your room. So you want to like, move towards these objects and take them back to your bed. And you do this within like a time frame. So there's like a timer, like a countdown that is always counting down, and you want to eventually, like I was thinking, oh, maybe you have to like avoid these pieces of food, Here, I have like a gameplay video. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, and the way you control this prototype is it's really similar to Pipsqueak's controls game. You hold down left side to rotate left, and you hold down right side to rotate right, and it's kind of like a steering game, but you're steering me. And when you collide with something, you kind of stop. So that's like, I'd say like this is really the origin for how I came up with Pipsqueak's control scheme. But, you know, with this prototype, I was like, oh, it's funny and it's gimmicky and, you know, like, I'm having a good time, and I bet people who see this GIF will think it's funny, but I didn't really know what to do with it beyond making this small experience, which, you know, isn't a bad thing, but I wanted to see if I could take it and make it into something bigger. So while I was working on Consumi and working on these small prototypes, I was asked by this event, Play NYC, which is also the event that Forest Cup was made, like Iron Saffron's game. And they were like, oh, can you make a game for this event? Please make it an installation game. You have 4 weeks to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, like, it's paid, and there's a deadline, so I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna take this idea of, you know, this cleaning your room game and try to make it into something a bit more complete. And that's actually, where Brenda came in. So, I made Brenda for this event. And Brenda's basically the prototype of cleaning your room, but kind of expanded a bit more. So the controls are also just like hold down like left side, right side to rotate the character. But the only thing that's different about it is like when you release the foot, the other foot rotates. So it's kind of like this weird compass movement. And I worked on this. I collaborated with AP on this because we didn't have like much time, and I was trying to prototype the movement on my own, and it just kind of like was not super great. Like basically the way I did this was I rigged a 3D model, and then I rotated the joints depending on if you were holding down, you know, a key or releasing it, and that's what made this like funny movement. But I couldn't figure out how to get it like working consistently, so AP really helped me on that part. And this is like the early beginnings of that game. So yeah, this is like the movement. So yeah, Brenda is just like a pretty simple game about you know, walking around in this space and collecting stuff and returning it back to its place. And it's like basically a more polished version of the idea that I initially had. And let's see. Oh, and here are some photos from the event. So I also got the opportunity to like decorate the space. So I chose this little alcove, and you know, like made it really comfortable with like cushions and stuff. And I like cut out a bunch of like cardboard that I painted and put together. And I don't know, I really like thinking about games as like this thing you can enjoy, and especially at events where, you know, we're showing stuff, I find it extremely exhausting, and I usually get overwhelmed really quickly. So I tried to create a space that even I could enjoy and just like relax in, you know, because it gets tiring when you're showing your stuff. And for that event, I also made this plush controller. I used Flora. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Adafruit, but they make these sewable microcontrollers, which you can use like conductive thread to sew like onto conductive fabric, and that's basically what this is. So this is essentially like you know, your right key, and this is like your left key. And yeah, sorry I didn't bring this friend, but yeah, so yeah, this is like the project that I made with that original prototype in mind. I guess like with that project design-wise, AP and I kind of split it half and half, and it did use time as like a way to end the game, but I guess there were sort of like increasing levels of difficulty, which was something that I've never really explored in my own work. So like the makeup game and the yoga game all kind of remain more or less, you know, like you can play it over again, but it never gets harder, and there aren't many, like there isn't too much variation in what you do once you learn how to do it. So Brenda, I guess, is like an example where, there's like a thing you need to avoid. Like this guy appears later on after you've played the game like maybe 3 or 4 times and have like passed like the stage or something. And if you run into him, basically you'll get like electrocuted. So you want to avoid him, and you know, so yeah, he's like a toaster dot. Yeah, so I guess like I was mentioning this a little bit earlier, but a lot of my work in my prototypes have been like, they all share this like timer, and I guess like at first I was like, oh, okay, like this is cool. I want the game to end somehow. I'm gonna do it by giving you a countdown, and you have to complete the thing as many times as quickly as possible and do it right. And I figured, oh, that's like one way to make a game, you know, except I realized like the thing with timers is if you think about it in terms of like a more long-term thing, I personally don't like the idea of saying like, oh, it gets harder because you have to perform faster, you know, like I don't think that's a great solution to like making a variation of like any of these small prototypes. So I really wanted to figure out a way to like to take that and like do something different with it. So with Pipsqueak, I was actually like influenced by a lot of like games that I've played and really admired, but could never really figure out how to do what they're doing. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with this game, but it's called Rust Bucket, and it's by Nitro. And you can also, I actually don't have the picture of ending, but there's this other game that I think Rust Bucket was based off on, and it's basically like a roguelike, but there are sets of levels that are all these like handcrafted puzzles, which requires the player to like solve things by like through parity. So what I mean by that is like in Pipsqueak, I mentioned that when you move, the enemies move. I got that idea from like games like these, where maybe I can find it. Let me see. Yeah, maybe I. Yeah, so these are pictures of ending. Like when I first played it, I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like I really think turn-based movement is really interesting. But you know, it's just so clean. I don't know how to do something like that myself. So yeah, it's like you know, it's 4-directional movement, and when you move, the enemies move. Yeah, I'd say like Rust Bucket is like a much more polished version of ending, and it's like really well thought out, and I really enjoyed playing that game on the subway. But yeah, I also looked at other iOS games like Duck Roll, which I'm not sure who made this, but I really enjoyed how simplistic the puzzles were, and I felt like this was kind of an easier version of like Steven's Sausage Roll, which I've attempted to play, but like never could really, like I didn't feel like it was accessible enough for me. But I like the idea of, you know, taking this one thing where you're just like moving around with a fork, and your goal is to like place sausages onto these girls, and just seeing like all this space that you can explore with that one action, you know? Like that was really cool to me, and I always have admired games like that, but felt like I could never do something like that because it just seems like a huge challenge to do something like that. Yeah, so anyways, those are just like some of the games that influenced Pipsqueak. Yeah, so I actually did make a small prototype that was basically a clone of Ending. And this was like for a class, like a prototyping class. But in it, like the thing was like Robin Hood. So I drew Robin Hood and Little John, and you have to work together to like collect the bags of gold without like getting hit on by the enemies. And I don't know, I thought it was like a cool concept because I like this idea of turn-based movement, but I didn't think there was anything super innovative about it. Like it wasn't really that experimental. I felt like it was maybe the safest thing I made in terms of like designing something by myself. So I just kind of, you know, neglected it and like basically dismissed like all level-based games and like games that had enemies because I was like, oh, this stuff is just too traditional for me, and you know, it's boring, and I want to make like weird stuff that doesn't fall into like what we normally think of games as. But anyway, I guess. Oh, should I turn it off? Oh, thank you. Anyway, so I'm gonna go back and talk a little more about Pipsqueak. So basically, here I'll show you like what. Yeah, so I was like, basically, I was thinking like, oh, I'm not sure what I'm gonna make for my Fantastic Arcade game, but I just made a game about cleaning a room, and I really like this character named Brenda, so I'm just gonna use her, and maybe I'll like come up with an idea that could be cool. So I was thinking like, oh, maybe it would be cool to make like a game about grocery shopping where, you know, you're collecting things and putting things in a cart. So design-wise, they're like pretty similar. So yeah, Pipsqueak actually originated as like Brenda, I guess. But as you can see, like the only difference between the movement in Pipsqueak and Brenda is Brenda, you're holding down to rotate, and nothing is discrete. But I like I said, I like turn-based stuff, and I think grids are cool. So I was like, oh, what if you just snap that onto a grid, you know? And instead of like holding down, you just tap, and that like rotates you a little bit. So that was basically like the one change from Brenda to Pipsqueak. It's all like this same, you know, it ultimately comes from, you know, this one prototype of like steering me around my room like a car, you know, and like I guess that's like how I iterated on like prototyping a control for the game. But I guess like even though I had this interesting thing, I didn't really know what to do with it. You know, I was like thinking, oh, maybe it could be something local multiplayer, like where you're competing against someone, because that seems like something that that I could make, you know, and it can be actiony, so you know, it's exciting, and maybe you have like three minutes to do this and compete with someone. But I didn't think, like, I wanted to challenge myself and try to like attempt to solve those problems that I had in consuming. Like, I wanted to see if I could do something about like, oh, can I make something that is you know, like that has variations in its mechanics and like can you know, be more interesting for like more than 5 minutes. So yeah, I drew this one character just cause, and I guess like this is really like the first instance you see Pipsqueak. I didn't really care about making like a compelling character. I was just curious about like figuring out how to approach this problem. So you know, like the games I showed you earlier, all these parody puzzles, all these turn-based games, they all require other characters, and they all require like other enemies for it to be like an interesting experience. You know, all these little guys have their own ways of movement, like their own patterns, and I just thought like, oh, okay, I can just do that quickly. I've done that a lot in BEGLITCHED. You know, I just need to come up with some guys and like use those as patterns that I can experiment with. So, you know, I had that like weird discrete like walking. I needed to add some like other, you know, like other elements, you know, to see if there's anything interesting there. Yeah, so like in September I posted this GIF, and this was like basically me like putting in enemies that I thought of and just seeing what that could be like. You know, like a lot of them are actually still the same. Like this one and this one, they're not really too different from like their initial conception. And yeah, I just thought it was pleasant to like create something like a caterpillar that's basically like, you know, 6 enemies strung together and see it move like that when you move, you know? So yeah, like after making bad guys, the process of just putting stuff together, like putting levels together, was actually like pretty straightforward. You know, I would just, you know, emphasize movement. So I guess like this is a good, like this is useful. So if you think about, yeah, there's a good grid right here, and these are the feet. You know, I was just like thinking, oh, what are, like I was playing with it a lot and playing with just like moving this little avatar around on the screen without like making any levels, and thinking like, oh, what's interesting about this? You know, like, oh, moving in a straight line is kind of cool. I guess like turning like and making turns like around corners could be interesting, or you know, like figuring out a way to stand in one place is also kind of neat, you know, and just like using these as like the main drives to create levels. So like an example of just moving in a straight line is this level. This one, it's like you want to go like in a zigzag pattern, and you know, and then I start like introducing enemies. This is level 2. You meet Dunyan. And like, you know, the enemies have their own patterns where they just like go back and forth and everything's really simple. But I really liked this template I created where, you know, all the characters kind of have their own little gimmick, but you can throw them in this level and just like kind of create something weird and playful with it. Let's see. Yeah, and then like when I got stuck on making stuff, I would just think, oh, like what would be another fun thing to mess around with or play with? So I just kind of drew like all these little enemies and thought of different things they could do. Like this one, like this one's like a balloon enemy. And it basically expands when you move one space, you know? And I thought, like, oh, that's like funny and like a cute little character, so I put that in the game. There's some enemies that like I didn't end up getting a chance to put in, but like I guess this one is actually like the cactus one because it's like stationary. And yeah, that's kind of like the process of how I went about like adding more stuff. It was like, oh, I don't know what more, like I can't think of any more levels to make. I'm gonna just like draw some characters and think of like maybe the easiest way to change my code up and, you know, make that into like a new enemy. Yeah, this one didn't get into the game, but it was like this one that shot like projectiles that like would like move when you moved. Yeah. So yeah, here are just like some other examples of like other guys I made. This one I think is like, it's Splorpo, the pear. Wow, this like, yeah, and this one is like the peach that spins around. And yeah, I guess these ones changed kind of a bit. This one punches you, so it will punch and then like retract. And this one will just rotate with like big fists. And that's like the balloon, and this one is like pokey. He's a slow poke. So he takes steps like every 2 steps you take, so he just moves slower. And then I was like, oh, I don't want it to just be about you facing bad guys. There's other stuff to do, you know? Why not approach design with like making stuff that isn't about like death and, you know, getting hurt? So I added like just like stuff you see in these games, like keys where this is like a trick. So something that I learned from this project is like it was hard for me to think about making like stuff that became increasingly more difficult in my games, such as like doing your makeup or doing yoga. But with games that emphasize movement and getting from like one place to another, it's like actually there's just a lot of space to play with, and it's a lot easier to think about that in terms of like doing creative stuff. So all the initial levels are basically about getting from one place to another. Like you have a start position and then you get to like the little portal or little exit. And so when you add a key to it, basically like you're just telling the player like, oh, okay, I need to get this first. And sometimes you can like place that key like right in the start position. So you have to like, or not here, no, you can like, you can start by standing next to the exit, but like maybe the key is somewhere else. So you have to kind of do this loop back. And, you know, I was just thinking about like, oh, what are interesting ways to traverse this space? And I like circle this guy. And this is just like, another thing that I added, which was like, you know, it's basically like Sokoban. This is just like a friendly little box, and you're just pushing it around to like help you open gates up that require something to be like put on this button. I'm spoiling too much. Let's see. Yeah, anyway, so once again, yeah, this is kind of how I went about, like, you know, figuring out what to do when it came to enemies. I just would, like, after I made them, I would also, like, think about them, like, thinking about, like, oh, like, what are the aspects about them that are cool, you know? It's like, oh, it moves horizontally, vertically, and clockwise, or this one only moves clockwise, or you know, this one only rotates clockwise but stands still. You know, just like thinking about little variations like that. And because I like drawing stuff out and cutting stuff out, I also just like used index cards to just organize them and help me come up with levels. Because like I would get stuck thinking about like, oh, what other, you know, interesting thing could I make here? So what I did was like put, you know, each little character on its own sheet and just like think about design as in like, oh, okay, well, I need the player. You know, eggs are fun in the level. You definitely need an exit, and there's definitely going to be ground. You know, like these are, and they're walls. So like all these things are like definite. Oh, you have to have these in each level. But then, you know, there are other things like these are enemies, and you know, I can like pick whichever one I want to go into the level, and then here are things that, you know, affect the environment. This I thought was cool, but I couldn't get it to work totally. It's like this conveyor belt which like pushes you forward, but I didn't have enough time to make it. But like yeah, so like I also had items that you can interact with that also changed like this experience of just moving from point A to point B. And you probably might have seen these. But yeah, once I made those cards, I I like didn't have a lot of time left, so, and I also wanted to put some more stuff in, so I was like really deliberate about like making sure that like certain enemies that I didn't really include got into the levels. And the way I did this was like I would just start off with like shapes. So I guess this is what was useful about working on Consume Me and working on like stuff that had like tetrominoes and like polyominoes. But it did help me think about like this one level as like this one shape. And then like what I would do after that is like, oh, like it could be cool to like maybe add a wall here. Or towards the very end, I was like really excited about this idea. It was like, oh, what if I just like put in a bunch of these rooms and then and then connect them in like different ways, and then like kind of put a little enemy in each room, you know. And yeah, and I just like thought about level design as like taking these blocks and like thinking of ways to like carve paths through them, and then after that I would like take, you know, like these enemies and like place them in weird spots, and I would just make sure that like, oh, you know, like caterpillars, they move in these clockwise motions. It could be cool to like really emphasize that, you know, and this also like forces the player to figure out like, how do I stand in place and move around still to get like the enemies out of the way. So like those are just all these are just like ways to like help brainstorm, thinking about like, you know, creating interesting combinations out of the flashcards that I made. Yeah, so like around this time I was like going a lot into like level design, which was something that I never really did in my personal work, and I was kind of running out of time, and the game was all 2D, and it just like I didn't really have much time to think about the art. And art is usually what I've been known for and what I do. So I kind of cheated when it came to like making it look good. And what I did was I really love Polly Pocket because I think like their colors are just like really pleasant, and they do this cool thing where I've always found it like really hard to make things not blend in when there's no outline. Like BEGLITCHED was an attempt at doing that, and I think some things still blended into their backgrounds, but I felt like it was cool to study these toys because, you know, they're essentially these like 3D models that don't have outlines yet. Like they like things just still contrast really nicely. So that was like a really cool learning thing. And what I did was like just sample the colors just right off like these like old vintage toys. And then once I did that, like I kind of came up with this palette that, you know, I thought worked. I just like liked these colors, and they felt like nice. They like felt like they went together. So that's kind of like all the stuff that you see later in the game. Like I started off with color when it came to iterating on art. And yeah, like I said, the game was all 2D at first. And I was planning to keep it 2D, but I just think like compared to what it looks like now, this looked kind of bad, and I don't know, I just like wasn't totally satisfied with it. And even with like changing the color palette, I was like, oh, this doesn't look super great. I mean, it's interesting and I got to explore other stuff, but I don't know, I feel like I could do more with the art. So this is like how it changed into 3D. I was like really curious about how it might look in 3D, so I just took a bunch of spheres in Unity and just like plopped them on top of my, like in my character. Let me see if I can, there's also a GIF for that. Here. Yeah, so this is all just like, I just like squashed and stretched spheres and then like put materials, like default materials onto them. And I kept like some 2D elements, like the hands are 2D and the face is 2D. And I was like, oh wow, this is actually not too difficult to make. I'm kind of want to do this, but like I have 3 weeks left, so I probably don't have time to like make it 3D. And I was just like, I don't know, but after seeing it look like that, I just felt like, oh, I can't go back and just be okay with having it 2D after I've seen this, you know? So like I just like decided to go and do it, and like I, you know, modeled all the assets I needed in Maya and then like brought them into Unity. Like this is all you need to make like this game, because everything is basically like a sphere that I kind of like squashed a little bit, and then like all the facial animations, all the faces, and like everything else, that's all like just 2D sprites that are like positioned carefully like on top of the 3D sphere. So it's like that. That's why it's kind of wonky looking. As like this weird blend. Yeah, I was like just, here's some like other, you know, GIFs of like playing with 3D. This is like when I you know, modeled stuff, and I haven't connected the legs yet, but I was just like, oh, this is so neat. And I kind of made it a little easier on myself by like keeping some things in 2D, and there's like a reason for that, because I was thinking like, oh, like you get this pan occasionally and you can use it to like smash 3D guys, but maybe you just can't do that to like the 2D ones on the ground. And I was like, oh, that could be like interesting gameplay. But I didn't really get a chance to do that too much in like the levels I built. Yeah, that's like... Yeah, so like this is basically all the levels that I came up with, you know, after making everything into 3D, I just, you know, built a lot of stuff really, really quickly, and I can show you some of them. So yeah, this is like a later one where that's like that yellow dog from earlier, but now he's a peach. And yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Pipsqueak gets sad. Yeah, or you know, this is like another area where like you have a mix of 2D and 3D. You're like trying to get the key to go over here, you know. Thanks. Yeah, and then this is like the final level where like it's just everything is crammed into one level, and I was like telling you about like thinking of rooms and having like enemies be in their own little room, and this is it. So like those guys are in that room, and like the cacti are over here. Yeah, so that's basically it. If you want to ask me more questions or talk to me in person later, please come by. I like made a bunch of these trading cards that are secretly business cards, and I also made stickers. And I ordered a bunch of these cool enamel pins of the egg that you get to collect. And I'm going to put that online and for sale soon, so just stay tuned. And yeah, if you want to know where to reach me, I'm QDork on Twitter, and you can visit my website here. And that's it.
I think we have time for just a couple of questions before we move on to our final thing.
Hey, so I noticed in the game there was sort of an interesting bit with the frying pan that it's not turn-based.
Yeah.
And so that was an intentional decision. And can you talk about like how you decided to
Sure.
go with that stuff?
Yeah, I guess like in the game, maybe I should just like I'll just like leave it on here. Actually, I'll just rewind it a little bit. Yeah, this is like the level where the frying pan occurs. So he's like thinking like, oh, because you pivot around your feet, right? You are technically rotating. So it made sense to me to like have something be an extension of your hand, also rotate. But like, I don't know. It's not particularly like well thought out. It's just like, oh, it's funny to have like a pan, and yeah, your arms, you know, kind of just move randomly with physics. So I'm just gonna add that in.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh, okay, hang on.
Hi, I have a question about one of the friends in the 2D bit.
Sure.
You drew a bunch of enemies.
Yeah.
I just have a question about the one that's on the lily pad.
Oh, on the lily pad. Okay, so I guess that one is like the initial version of the pear. Do you know the pear, the punching one? So I was like thinking of making a little frog and having its tongue stick out, and then eventually I just changed it to a fist. So that's like what happened there. It's like the same enemy, but I didn't make the frog. Maybe I'll do that someday.
Please do.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jenny. This was wonderful.
Thank you.